It's kind of a refreshing thing when awakening itself becomes a complete concept, just an idea. Because when all distinctions start to collapse, all boundaries, all knowing of what this is compared to that, if this is better than that. And when it just is what it is, which it always is, we just think that this isn't it. And therefore we search. We search for something other than this. And a lot of the time it's because we deeply suffer. We're kind of trying to look for an escape. Understandably so, because we're afraid. We're afraid of the truth, the truth of who we really are. Because you'll see that the deeper that you go, you'll see that there's nothing there. You'll see that there's no one behind the thoughts, no one behind the emotions, no one animating the body. The body is just a miraculous, living organism like other animals. But somehow we seem to be able to develop this sense of me and ownership of this body. And it complicates things, seemingly. We feel threatened and we want to feel special, better than, more than, enough. And so then all of these stories start to build. How can I become enough? How can I gain more worth? And then you try all of these different ways, but life can't be confined that way. It can't be defined that way. It can't be solidified ever. But that's exactly what the mind is trying to do because it believes that that is reality, that you can pin it down somehow and just land there, stay there forever. And then, ironically, that's what creates more of the suffering because you see that everything is ephemeral. It's not known the way that the mind thinks it's known. So when we come to this point, um, that isn't really a point, but this place where we see that we can't really get it, we can't really understand it through the mind. It's pretty pointless. It's pretty futile. You can try forever, but that's why this is more of a deconstruction of what you accumulated. The ways in which you try to deal with the suffering, the stories and these places of safety that you constructed to try and shield yourself from how difficult life can be, how painful it is to really show yourself, how scary it is to actually admit to yourself what is just here. So, as these imaginary walls are kind of being confronted as not solid, they're not actually real, then what's shown to you is the raw simplicity of what's here. And then it feels like this unraveling starts to happen almost choicelessly because you see that there's no escape. There was never an escape from the suffering, from the pain that was here. But in a way, it takes this, I don't know, maturing or seeking enough to finally feel like I'm done. I'm just ready for the truth. And that sort of internal, I don't know, conviction or something is what creates this openness that shows you how unbearable the pain and the suffering is here and how I can't avoid it anymore. I can't hide. I can't pretend. I can't stuff it down anymore. So it's like a forced honesty and it can be highly uncomfortable. Can be very confusing for those around you because you might be acting differently because the emotions are just more free to flow rather than an imaginary sense trying to control and manipulate it and appear a certain way so it feels artificially safe but confined. So then this deconstruction is the most uncomfortable thing you could possibly go through, I think, because everything you've been running from just comes up. And in a way, it's really beautiful because you're forced to mend the past. You're forced to see the truth. You're forced to see yourself exactly the way you are. And you realize that it wasn't actually a problem in the way that you thought. It wasn't actually something to be fixed because it was never a solid thing to begin with. But everyone is so lost in the illusion that you are a solid thing to be fixed and that there is something wrong with you. And you just gain all of these labels. And you think they're truth. You think that's who you are, whether it be good or bad. But the reason why this can feel so confusing is because you start to not believe the good and bad. You start to not believe the labels. And then sometimes you don't know how to act. You don't know how to behave because you have no rule book anymore. But that's where you keep coming back to yourself. Like, what feels true right now? That's all you have. Not that you really have anything, not that there is anyone there to have anything, but that's all there is. It's always just been a sense because this has always been spontaneous. You were never able to predict the future. So the ability to do that, or the belief in that imagination is, it just softens because it's not real. That's not actually, that's not reality. Reality isn't an imagined past or a projected future. That's free to arise in this, but if there's only the belief in that, that's where you're just living in daydream. There can still be memories of the past and projections into the future, kind of barely so, but now it's seen as just, I don't know, images coming from nothing. And they can seemingly be used, maybe not. It's just held very lightly, just like everything else, every thought, emotion. It's all this, all equally this. None of it is truth. Everything's okay. Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish, but for sure, the, sense of self can rest as this beingness or isness or presence. Um, and it can even have a sense that it's not separate from everything. So, but there is then sort of beyond that of the absolute unknown, where, yeah, it's complete emptiness. Um, and it's just, yeah, it's sometimes just really hard to tell. Like, I think most are probably there where they can rest as this beingness or presence, um, or identify as it, but not knowing that they're identified as it. So kind of like a bigger sense of self, a higher sense of self or something,
Mhm.
or more expanded sense of self. And you do still have all these concepts and ideas and stories about separation, basically, you know. And so when you go beyond that, which again is not separate from that, but beyond that, where it is completely empty and unknown, all the stories are seen to be false. There is no hierarchy anywhere. There is no one anywhere to be better or worse or to have the answer. That's where you see that, oh, no one's an authority because we're all making this shit up. And most people are playing God, presenting themselves as if potentially they're no selves, but they have an understanding of what this no self is. And it can actually be obvious that they're super arrogant. They're telling you what life is. They're
Yeah.
telling you how to escape seeking, or um, what the path is. And yeah, it's just obvious that that's so equally the whole dream still. I guess I can just speak from what seemed to unfold here. was that there was such an emptying out of the body, emptying out of all of the personal stories, um, and the personal meaning and the attachments and relational aspects to everything. And then eventually it seemed like then sort of like a fullness came back in when the body was empty enough. And I don't know if this is for everyone. I think it's a little bit similar. And you can't predict when the fullness will come in, but it really felt like the body was replenished by a very neutral energy. It wasn't personal energy anymore. Personal energy meaning like my will to live because I want this. That was gone. It was just more just a very neutral energy that wasn't striving or neurotic anymore. Um, and it felt very edgeless, like the body wasn't a boundary anymore. And you could see the absolute full aliveness of everything. Not just sight, but you can sense that it just is so. It felt like when this felt like me in my life, my perception and my perspective was limited, but I didn't know it was limited. I thought that was everything. There was actually a sort of a fullness in that sense. Like, yeah, this was my world, my view, what I'm doing with my life, all my desires, wants, um, preferences, whatever you want to call it. And then when there's an emptying out, it's like you you might not feel this in the beginning, but there's this and even this is the wrong word, but there's a merging with life itself where and it's not really emerging, it's just kind of a death of this central here-ness that dissolves, and then it reveals that actually everything was boundless, everything was completely empty and inherently had no meaning. You can't make sense of it at all, like no way. um and then you see very clearly what seeking actually is, the effects of it. And you can kind of, you just see it clearly once it's out of the system, or even as it's dying, as that sense is dying. But especially when it's out of the system, it's like, whoa, you see so clearly humanity. And it could be just shockingly disturbing, as well as, well, it could just mostly be shockingly disturbing. But I mean, there's a beauty to it as well, I guess.